The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty training ground at Camp Pendleton, California. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her tactical vest one final time before stepping into what would become the most defining moment of her military career. At 28, she had already proven herself countless times in a male-dominated world, but nothing could have prepared her for what lay ahead. Maria had grown up in a small town in Texas where her father ran an auto repair shop, and her mother worked double shifts at the local diner. Money was always tight, but her parents instilled in her the values of hard work and never backing down from a challenge. When she was 16, her older brother Diego enlisted in the Marines and was deployed to Afghanistan. 3 months later, the family received the news that would change everything. Diego had been killed by an improvised explosive device while on patrol. Instead of breaking her spirit, Diego's death ignited something fierce inside Maria. She made a promise at his funeral that she would carry on his legacy and serve her country with the same dedication he had shown. The day after her 18th birthday, she walked into the recruitment office and signed up for the United States Marine Corps. Basic training at Paris Island was brutal, but Maria thrived under the pressure. While other recruits struggled with the physical demands and mental stress, she pushed herself harder than anyone else. Her drill instructors noticed her exceptional marksmanship skills early on. She could hit targets that seasoned Marines missed. More importantly, they saw her natural leadership abilities and her unwavering determination to never leave a fellow Marine behind. After completing her initial training, Maria was assigned to the 1st Marine Division, where she quickly rose through the ranks. Her first deployment to Iraq came when she was 22, serving as a combat engineer. She spent 15 months clearing roadside bombs and helping rebuild infrastructure in war-torn communities. The experience taught her that war wasn't just about fighting. It was about protecting innocent people and building something better from the ruins. Her second deployment took her to Afghanistan, following in her brother's footsteps. This time, she served as a squad leader for a team responsible for training Afghan security forces. The work was dangerous and often thankless, but Maria approached every mission with the same intensity and focus that had carried her through her entire military career. She earned the respect of both her fellow Marines and the Afghan soldiers they worked alongside. Between deployments, Maria continued her education, earning a bachelor's degree in criminal justice through online courses. She also became an instructor at the Marine Corps' Advanced Infantry Training Battalion, where she taught combat tactics and leadership principles to new Marines. Her students often commented that she had an unusual ability to remain calm under pressure while inspiring others to push beyond their perceived limitations. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late March. Maria was reviewing training schedules in her office when her commanding officer, Colonel James Mitchell, knocked on her door. His expression was serious as he sat down across from her desk. A special operations unit was being assembled for a classified mission, and they needed someone with her specific skill set and experience. The details would be provided only on a need-to-know basis, but the mission would take place in a hostile environment where traditional military tactics might not be sufficient. Maria didn't hesitate to volunteer. She had always been drawn to challenging assignments, and the opportunity to work with an elite unit was exactly the kind of test she craved. Colonel Mitchell warned her that this mission would be unlike anything she had experienced before. The stakes were higher, the risks greater, and the margin for error virtually non-existent. But he also knew that if anyone could handle the pressure, it was Maria Santos. The next 3 weeks were spent in intensive preparation. Maria worked with a team of 12 other Marines, each selected for their specialized skills and proven combat record. The group included snipers, explosives experts, communication specialists, and medics. They trained 18 hours a day, practicing everything from urban warfare tactics to hostage rescue scenarios. The team leader was Gunnery Sergeant Robert "Tank" Thompson, a massive man with 20 years of military experience and 3 Purple Hearts. Tank had served in every major conflict since the Gulf War and was known for his ability to keep his troops alive in impossible situations. He took Maria under his wing, recognizing her potential and helping her understand the unique dynamics of special operations work. As the training progressed, Maria learned that their mission would take them to a remote region where enemy forces had established a heavily fortified compound. Intelligence reports suggested that high-value targets were using the location as a planning center for future attacks on American interests. The team's job was to infiltrate the compound, gather intelligence, and neutralize any threats they encountered. The briefings revealed the true scope of the challenge they faced. The compound was situated in mountainous terrain that provided natural defensive advantages to anyone inside. Satellite imagery showed multiple guard towers, razor wire perimeters, and what appeared to be underground tunnel systems. Local sources reported that the enemy forces included both foreign fighters and experienced local militants who knew the terrain intimately. What made the mission even more complex was the presence of civilians in the surrounding area. Intelligence analysts believed that some of the buildings in the compound might house non-combatants, including women and children who were being held against their will. This meant that any assault would need to be carefully planned to minimize civilian casualties while still achieving the tactical objectives. Maria spent her evenings studying maps and satellite photos, memorizing every detail of the compound's layout. She practiced her marksmanship skills on the range, fine-tuning her ability to make precise shots at long distances. Most importantly, she worked on building trust and communication with her team members, knowing that their lives would depend on their ability to work together seamlessly under pressure. The night before their departure, Maria called her parents from the base. She couldn't tell them where she was going or what she would be doing, but she wanted to hear their voices one more time. Her mother sensed that something significant was happening and made her promise to stay safe. Her father, ever practical, reminded her of the lessons he had taught her in the garage: measure twice, cut once, and always have a backup plan. As she hung up the phone, Maria thought about Diego and the promise she had made at his funeral. She was about to embark on the most dangerous mission of her career, but she felt ready. Years of training, multiple combat deployments, and countless hours of preparation had brought her to this moment. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but she was confident in her abilities and trusted her team completely. The transport helicopter was scheduled to depart at 0400 hours. Maria packed her gear methodically, checking and double-checking every piece of equipment. Her rifle was clean and sighted, her ammunition was properly sorted, and her communications equipment had been tested multiple times. She carried photos of her family and a small cross that had belonged to Diego, reminders of why she served and what she was fighting to protect. Tank gathered the team for a final briefing before they left. He reminded them that this mission would test everything they had learned and that success would depend on their ability to adapt to changing circumstances. The intelligence they had received was good, but combat situations were unpredictable, and they needed to be prepared for anything. Most importantly, he emphasized that they were all responsible for bringing each other home safely. As the helicopter lifted off from Camp Pendleton, Maria looked down at the lights of the base growing smaller below them. She thought about all the Marines who had served before her, including her brother, and felt the weight of their legacy on her shoulders. The mission ahead would be dangerous, but she was ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. She had trained for this moment her entire military career, and she was determined not to let her team down. The helicopter flew through the night, carrying them toward their destination and toward a confrontation that would test every skill Maria had developed and every lesson she had learned. She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, preparing her mind for the battle ahead. In just a few hours, she would find herself in a situation that would require her to draw upon reserves of courage and determination she didn't even know she possessed. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and rotor wash at the forward operating base just as the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon. Maria and her team quickly disembarked and made their way to the command tent where they would receive their final mission briefing. The base was a temporary structure built into the side of a mountain, designed to provide support for special operations in the region without attracting unwanted attention. Major Patricia Reynolds, the intelligence officer assigned to their mission, spread a detailed topographical map across the table. The target compound was located approximately 15 kilometers to the northeast, nestled in a valley surrounded by steep rocky cliffs. Recent drone surveillance had revealed increased activity in the area, with multiple vehicles arriving and departing at regular intervals. This suggested that something significant was being planned inside the compound. The assault plan was complex, but straightforward. The team would approach the compound under cover of darkness, using a route that would take them through a series of ravines and ridges to avoid detection. Once they reached the perimeter, they would split into 3 groups: an overwatch team to provide sniper support, an assault team to breach the main building, and a support team to secure their escape route and handle any unexpected complications. Maria was assigned to the overwatch team along with Corporal Jake Morrison, a sniper with over 50 confirmed kills in Afghanistan and Iraq. Their job was to position themselves on a ridge overlooking the compound and provide covering fire for the assault team while monitoring the surrounding area for reinforcements. Tank emphasized that their success would largely depend on the Overwatch team's ability to eliminate threats quickly and accurately. The team spent the morning conducting final equipment checks and reviewing contingency plans. Maria zeroed her rifle at the base's firing range, confirming that it was shooting exactly where she aimed at various distances. She also practiced with the night vision equipment they would be using, ensuring that she could acquire targets quickly in low-light conditions. At 1,400 hours, they began their movement toward the target. The terrain was challenging, consisting primarily of loose rock and steep inclines that made silent movement difficult. The team moved in single file, maintaining radio silence except for essential communications. Maria carried her rifle, 200 rounds of ammunition, emergency medical supplies, and enough water and food for 3 days in case they needed to remain in position longer than expected. The approach took 6 hours of careful movement through increasingly hostile terrain. As they got closer to the compound, they encountered signs of enemy activity: discarded cigarette butts, footprints in the dirt, and cache supplies hidden under rock overhangs. This confirmed that the area was regularly patrolled and that they would need to be extremely cautious to avoid detection. 2 hours before sunset, the team reached their final staging area, a cluster of boulders approximately 2 kilometers from the compound. Through binoculars, they could see their target clearly for the first time. The intelligence reports had been accurate. The compound consisted of several buildings surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Armed sentries moved along the perimeter at regular intervals, and searchlights swept the surrounding area continuously. Tank made the decision to delay the assault until the early morning hours when the guards would be at their lowest state of alertness. This would give Maria and Morrison time to move into their overwatch position and conduct detailed surveillance of the compound's defenses. They would need to identify guard positions, patrol patterns, and potential escape routes before the assault team moved in. As darkness fell, Maria and Morrison began their movement toward the ridge that would serve as their firing position. The route required them to crawl through a series of narrow gullies while avoiding patches of loose rock that could create noise. It took them nearly 3 hours to cover the 800 meters to their position, but they arrived undetected with a clear view of the entire compound. From their elevated position, they could see inside the compound walls and observe the activities taking place in the various buildings. Through their night vision scopes, they counted at least 25 armed guards maintaining security around the perimeter. Several vehicles were parked near the main building, including what appeared to be military trucks and civilian cars. Most concerning was the presence of heavy weapons positions at each corner of the compound. Morrison set up his sniper rifle while Maria used a laser rangefinder to measure the exact distance to various targets within the compound. The main building was 847 meters away, well within the effective range of their weapons. The guard towers were positioned at ranges between 650 and 920 meters, also manageable shots for experienced marksmen. Maria noted wind conditions and calculated the adjustments they would need to make for accurate shooting. Through their observation, they learned that the guards followed a predictable routine. Patrols moved around the perimeter every 30 minutes, while the tower guards remained stationary except for brief breaks every 2 hours. This information would be crucial for timing the assault to maximize their tactical advantage. At 0200 hours, Tank's voice came through their earpieces, confirming that the assault team was in position and ready to move. Maria and Morrison conducted final checks of their equipment and confirmed their target assignments. Morrison would focus on the guard towers and any heavy weapons positions, while Maria would provide support for the assault team and watch for reinforcements approaching from outside the compound. The assault began with Morrison's rifle firing a single suppressed shot that eliminated the guard in the northeast tower. Maria immediately engaged the guard in the southeast tower with her rifle, dropping him before he could raise an alarm. The assault team moved quickly through a breach they had created in the compound wall, while Maria shifted her attention to the main building where additional guards were beginning to emerge. What happened next changed everything. As the assault team approached the main building, enemy fighters began pouring out of concealed positions throughout the compound. The intelligence reports had severely underestimated the number of defenders present. Instead of the 25 guards they had counted, there appeared to be at least 60 armed fighters, many equipped with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. Maria watched through her scope as the assault team found themselves pinned down by overwhelming enemy fire. Tank's voice came through the radio, calling for immediate support as his team took cover behind a concrete barrier near the main building. Morrison was engaging multiple targets as quickly as he could, but there were simply too many enemy fighters for 2 snipers to handle effectively. The situation deteriorated rapidly when enemy fighters in the main building began firing on the assault team with a heavy machine gun. The concrete barrier that Tank's team was using for cover began to crumble under the sustained fire. Maria could see that they had only minutes before their position would be completely exposed to enemy fire. Tank made the decision that would haunt Maria for the rest of her life. Recognizing that his team was about to be overrun, he ordered a tactical withdrawal to their secondary rally point. The assault team would have to abandon their mission and escape through their predetermined route while they still had the opportunity. It was a sound military decision based on the tactical reality they faced, but it meant leaving their objectives unaccomplished. Maria watched through her scope as Tank and the other members of the assault team began their fighting withdrawal from the compound. They moved quickly but methodically, using covering fire and tactical movements to break contact with the enemy forces. Morrison continued to provide sniper support, picking off enemy fighters who tried to pursue the retreating Marines. As the assault team reached the compound wall and prepared to escape, Maria noticed something that made her blood run cold. In one of the buildings near the main structure, she could see people who were clearly not enemy fighters. Through her scope, she observed what appeared to be civilians, women, and children who seemed to be held captive in the compound. The intelligence reports about non-combatants being present had been accurate, but there was something else that captured Maria's attention. In the main building where the heavy machine gun was positioned, she could see a man who appeared to be directing the defense of the compound. Through her scope, she could make out enough detail to realize that this individual matched the description of one of the high-value targets they had been sent to capture or eliminate. Tank's voice came through the radio again, this time directed specifically at the Overwatch team. He ordered Maria and Morrison to begin their own withdrawal immediately and meet the rest of the team at the rally point. The mission had failed, and their priority now was to escape without taking any casualties. Morrison began packing his equipment and preparing to move, but Maria found herself frozen in place. She stared through her scope at the main building where the enemy commander was still visible, knowing that this might be their only chance to eliminate a significant threat to American forces. She also thought about the civilians she had seen and wondered what would happen to them if the Marines simply withdrew and left them in enemy hands. The weight of the decision pressed down on her shoulders as she realized that she was at a crossroads that would define not only the outcome of this mission, but possibly her entire military career. Tank's orders were clear: withdraw immediately and preserve the team. But Maria's training and her personal code of honor told her that there might be another option, one that would require her to act independently and assume enormous personal risk. As Morrison started moving away from their position, Maria made a choice that would change everything. Instead of following her orders to withdraw, she remained in position with her rifle trained on the compound below. She knew that what she was about to do would be considered insubordination, but she also knew that some opportunities only come once, and the consequences of inaction could be far worse than the risks of taking decisive action. Morrison had moved approximately 50 meters down the ridge when he realized that Maria wasn't following him. He turned back and saw her still in position behind her rifle, her eye pressed to the scope as she maintained her watch on the compound below. Through his own scope, he could see what had captured her attention. The enemy commander was still visible in the main building, and there seemed to be increased activity around the structures where the civilians were being held. "Santos, we need to move now," Morrison whispered urgently into his radio. Tank's orders were clear: immediate withdrawal to the rally point. Maria's voice came back steady but determined. "I can see the target, Morrison. He's right there, less than 900 meters. This might be our only shot at him." Morrison understood the tactical opportunity that Maria had identified, but he also understood the bigger picture. They were outnumbered by at least 3-1. Their assault team had already withdrawn, and staying in position would mean certain exposure once the enemy forces organized a search for the snipers who had been picking off their guards. The smart military decision was to follow orders and live to fight another day. "Maria, I get it, but we can't accomplish this mission alone," Morrison replied. "We need to move before they start looking for us up here." Through her scope, Maria watched as the enemy commander moved from window to window in the main building, apparently coordinating the defense and organizing search teams. She had studied his photograph during their mission briefing and was absolutely certain that this was one of the high-value targets they had been sent to eliminate. Intelligence reports suggested that he was responsible for planning attacks that had killed dozens of American soldiers and civilians. More importantly, Maria could see that the enemy fighters were beginning to move toward the buildings where the civilians were being held. She couldn't be certain of their intentions, but the possibility that innocent people might be harmed in retaliation for the marine assault made her stomach tighten with anxiety. Everything about the situation demanded immediate action, even though military protocol required her to withdraw. "Give me 5 minutes," Maria said into her radio. "I can make this shot, and then we'll move." Morrison hesitated for a moment before responding. He had worked with snipers throughout his military career and understood the confidence it took to attempt a shot at this distance under these conditions. But he also knew that 5 minutes could easily turn into 15 or 20 if the situation became complicated, and their window for escape was closing rapidly. Tank's voice suddenly crackled through their earpieces with unmistakable urgency. "Overwatch team, what is your status? We're at the rally point and ready to move to the extraction site." Morrison looked back toward Maria's position and made a decision that would haunt him for years afterward. Instead of forcing her to withdraw immediately, he chose to trust her judgment and give her the support she needed to attempt the shot. If anyone could make it work, it would be Maria Santos. "Tank, this is Morrison. Santos has identified the primary target and has a clear shot. Request permission to remain in position for 1 more minute." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Tank understood the value of eliminating a high-value target, but he also understood the risks of keeping his people in an exposed position any longer than absolutely necessary. The enemy forces in the compound were already organizing search teams, and it would only be a matter of time before they identified the ridge as a likely sniper position. "Negative," Tank finally replied. "The risk is too great. Move to the rally point immediately." Maria heard Tank's response, but her attention was completely focused on the target in her scope. The enemy commander had moved to a position where she had a clear shot through an open window. The range was 847 meters, well within her capabilities, but the shot would be complicated by a slight crosswind and the fact that the target was moving intermittently. She controlled her breathing and began the mental calculations that preceded every precision shot. Wind speed was approximately 8 miles per hour from the northwest, requiring a compensation of approximately 2 minutes of angle to the right. The target was at a slightly lower elevation than her position, requiring a hold that was 6 inches low at this distance. Most challenging was the fact that she would have only a narrow window of opportunity when the target was visible and stationary. Morrison remained in position despite Tank's direct order, understanding that Maria would need his support if the situation went wrong after she fired. He could see enemy fighters beginning to move up the slopes toward their general area, confirming that their position would be compromised within minutes regardless of what Maria decided to do. "Maria, you've got company coming up the backside of the ridge," Morrison warned. "Maybe 8 or 10 fighters, about 400 meters out, and closing. Maria acknowledged Morrison's warning but didn't move her eye from the scope. The enemy commander had paused near the window, and she could see him clearly as he spoke into what appeared to be a radio or telephone. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, and she knew it might not come again. She steadied her breathing, aligned her crosshairs precisely on the target's center mass, and began the slow, deliberate trigger squeeze that she had practiced thousands of times. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley, and through her scope, Maria watched the target collapse as the bullet found its mark. But instead of feeling the satisfaction of a successful shot, Maria immediately realized that her troubles were just beginning. The sound of the rifle shot had revealed their exact position to every enemy fighter in the compound, and she could see muzzle flashes from multiple weapons as they began firing in her direction. Bullets whined overhead and shattered rocks around their position as the enemy forces concentrated their fire on the ridge. Morrison was already moving toward Maria's position when she fired the shot. He reached her just as the incoming fire intensified and grabbed her arm. "Time to go right now." Maria quickly gathered her equipment while Morrison provided covering fire with his rifle. They began moving down the backside of the ridge just as the enemy search team that Morrison had spotted earlier came into view approximately 200 meters away. The enemy fighters immediately opened fire when they saw the two Marines, forcing Maria and Morrison to take cover behind a cluster of boulders. The tactical situation had deteriorated beyond anything they had trained for. They were trapped between the enemy forces pursuing them from below and the concentrated fire coming from the compound above. Their escape route to the rally point was blocked, and they were rapidly running out of ammunition and options. Morrison tried to reach Tank on the radio, but received only static. Either the radio had been damaged or they were too far from the rally point to maintain communication. This meant that they were completely on their own in hostile territory with limited supplies and no support. "We need to find another way out," Morrison said as bullets continued to strike the rocks around them. "The original route is compromised." Maria studied the terrain around their position and identified a narrow ravine that led away from the compound in a direction that might eventually connect with their secondary escape route. It would require them to cross approximately 200 meters of open ground while under fire, but it was their only viable option. As they prepared to make their desperate escape attempt, Maria looked back toward the compound and saw something that made her decision to take the shot seem even more justified. The enemy fighters were moving away from the buildings where the civilians were held, apparently responding to orders to pursue the snipers. Her shot had not only eliminated a significant target, but had also drawn the enemy forces away from the innocent people who might have been harmed in retaliation for the Marine assault. Morrison checked his rifle and confirmed that he had enough ammunition for the covering fire that would be necessary to get them across the open ground. Maria gathered the equipment that Morrison had been forced to leave behind when he came to her aid, including his spotting scope and additional ammunition. "On my mark, we moved to that ravine," Morrison said, pointing to their intended destination. "I'll provide covering fire, but we'll have to move fast." Maria nodded and prepared herself for what would be the most dangerous few minutes of her life. She thought about Diego and the promise she had made at his funeral, wondering if this would be where her own story ended. But she also thought about the successful shot she had just made and the possibility that her actions might save the lives of other Marines who wouldn't have to face the enemy commander she had just eliminated. The sound of gunfire intensified as the enemy forces attempted to close in on their position. Maria could hear voices shouting in multiple languages as the search teams coordinated their movements. She knew that she and Morrison had only minutes before they would be completely surrounded, making escape impossible. Morrison counted down from 3 and then opened fire with his rifle, sending carefully aimed shots toward the pursuing enemy fighters. Maria sprinted across the open ground toward the ravine, feeling bullets pass close enough to her head that she could hear their supersonic cracks. Behind her, Morrison's rifle continued firing as he covered her movement and prepared for his own dash to safety. Maria reached the ravine just as Morrison's covering fire began to slacken, indicating that he was running low on ammunition. She immediately set up her rifle and began returning fire toward the enemy positions, allowing Morrison to make his own sprint across the open ground. The enemy fighters had spread out across the ridge and were attempting to flank their position, making the tactical situation increasingly desperate. Morrison dove into the ravine just as a burst of automatic weapons fire kicked up dirt where he had been running. Both Marines were now in the relative safety of the rocky depression, but they could hear enemy fighters moving along the edges above them. The ravine provided concealment, but would become a trap if the enemy forces managed to position themselves at both ends. "How much ammunition do you have left?" Morrison asked as he checked his own remaining magazines. Maria conducted a quick inventory of her gear. 3 full magazines plus what's in the rifle. Maybe 90 rounds total. Morrison had approximately the same amount, which meant they had enough ammunition for a sustained firefight, but not enough to fight their way through a large number of enemy forces. Their best chance was to move through the ravine system and try to reach friendly territory before the enemy could organize a comprehensive search. They began moving deeper into the ravine, staying low and moving as quietly as possible over the loose rock and scattered debris. The walls of the depression were steep enough to provide good concealment, but they also limited their ability to observe the surrounding area and made them vulnerable to attack from above. After 30 minutes of careful movement, they reached a point where the ravine split into 2 separate channels. Morrison studied his map and GPS device to determine which route would be more likely to lead them toward safety. The left channel headed generally northwest toward the area where they were supposed to meet their extraction helicopter, while the right channel curved back toward the east and the enemy compound. As they were making this decision, Maria heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. Through her binoculars, she could see 2 enemy helicopters approaching their general area, apparently conducting a search for the Marines who had attacked the compound. This added a new dimension to their escape problem, as they would now have to avoid detection from both ground forces and aerial surveillance. "We need to get under better cover," Morrison said as the helicopters grew closer. "Those aircraft probably have thermal imaging equipment." They moved to a section of the ravine where large boulders had fallen from the walls above, creating natural shelters that would help mask their heat signatures. Both Marines pulled emergency thermal blankets from their survival kits and wrapped themselves in the reflective material to reduce their infrared signatures. The helicopters passed overhead twice during the next hour, but they didn't seem to identify the Marines' location. However, Maria and Morrison could hear radio communications in the distance, suggesting that ground search teams were moving through the area systematically. It was only a matter of time before one of these teams found their trail. As night began to fall, they resumed their movement through the ravine system. The darkness provided better concealment, but made navigation more difficult and dangerous. They used night vision equipment to avoid obstacles and maintain their sense of direction, but the rocky terrain made silent movement nearly impossible. 3 hours after leaving their original position, they reached a point where the ravine opened into a wider valley. Through their night vision devices, they could see a road approximately 2 kilometers away that matched one of the landmarks on their escape route. More importantly, they could see no signs of enemy activity in the immediate area. Morrison tried his radio again, and this time was able to establish weak contact with Tank's team. The assault team had successfully reached the primary extraction point, but the helicopter had been delayed due to enemy air activity in the region. Tank reported that they were holding a defensive position and waiting for the situation to stabilize before attempting extraction. "Tank, this is Morrison. Santos and I are approximately 3 kilometers southeast of your position and moving toward the secondary extraction site." Tank's relief was evident in his voice when he responded. "Roger, Morrison. We were beginning to think you didn't make it out. What's your status?" Morrison looked at Maria before responding. Both Marines were exhausted from their escape and low on ammunition, but they were uninjured and still capable of fighting. More importantly, they had accomplished something significant despite the failure of the overall mission. "We're beat up, but operational," Morrison replied. "Santos eliminated the primary target before we withdrew. Positive confirmation on the kill." The radio was silent for several seconds before Tank responded. "Say again, Morrison. Did you say the primary target is down?" "Affirmative," Morrison confirmed. "Santos made the shot at 847 meters, just before we were compromised. The target is confirmed eliminated. What Morrison didn't mention in his radio report was the extraordinary courage that Maria had shown in making that shot. He knew that she had disobeyed direct orders to withdraw, and he understood that there would likely be consequences for both of them when they returned to base. But he also knew that her actions had turned a failed mission into a significant victory. They reached the secondary extraction point just as dawn was breaking over the mountains. Tank and the rest of the team were positioned in a defensive perimeter around a small clearing where the helicopter would land. When Tank saw Maria and Morrison approaching, he stood up from his position and walked out to meet them. "Santos," Tank said as she removed her helmet and sat down on a nearby rock. "Morrison tells me you took out the primary target." Maria nodded, but didn't seem particularly excited about her accomplishment. "Yes, Gunny." Clean shot through the window of the main building. Tank studied her face for a moment before speaking again. "You realize you disobeyed a direct order when you failed to withdraw with Morrison." Maria met his gaze directly. "Yes, Gunny. I understand that I disobeyed orders. I accept full responsibility for my actions and any consequences that result." Tank was quiet for a long time as he considered the situation. As a military leader, he understood the importance of following orders and maintaining discipline. But he also understood that Maria's decision to take the shot had accomplished one of their primary mission objectives and potentially saved the lives of Marines who wouldn't have to face that particular enemy commander in the future. "We'll discuss this more when we get back to base," Tank finally said. "Right now, I'm just glad you both made it out alive." The extraction helicopter arrived 20 minutes later, and the team was airborne before enemy forces could respond to the aircraft's presence. During the flight back to base, Maria stared out the window at the mountainous terrain below and thought about the events of the past 24 hours. She had made a decision that could end her military career, but she had also struck a significant blow against an enemy who had been responsible for killing American soldiers and innocent civilians. When they arrived back at the forward operating base, Maria was immediately summoned to meet with Colonel Mitchell and Major Reynolds. The debriefing lasted for several hours as they reviewed every aspect of the mission, from the initial assault to Maria's unauthorized shot to the escape through the ravine system. Colonel Mitchell was particularly interested in Maria's decision-making process during the critical moments when she chose to remain in position rather than follow orders to withdraw. He wanted to understand her reasoning and evaluate whether her actions represented sound tactical judgment or dangerous insubordination. "Staff Sergeant Santos," Colonel Mitchell said near the end of the debriefing, "explain to me why you felt it was appropriate to disobey Gunnery Sergeant Thompson's direct order to withdraw." Maria had been preparing for this question since the moment she decided to take the shot. "Sir, I observed the primary target in a position where I had a clear shot at an effective range. Based on my assessment of the tactical situation, I believe this represented our best and possibly only opportunity to accomplish one of our primary mission objectives." Major Reynolds reviewed the intelligence reports on her laptop before asking the next question. "Were you aware that your decision to remain in position would compromise your escape route and place both you and Corporal Morrison at significant additional risk?" "Yes, ma'am," Maria replied. "I understood the risks involved. However, I also understood that the target I was observing had been responsible for planning attacks that killed American soldiers and civilians. I believe that eliminating this threat justified the additional risk to my own safety." Colonel Mitchell leaned back in his chair and studied Maria for several moments. "Staff Sergeant, your shot eliminated a high-value target that our intelligence community had been tracking for over 2 years. However, your decision to disobey orders put you and another Marine at unnecessary risk and could have resulted in the loss of 2 valuable personnel." Maria nodded and accepted the criticism without attempting to justify her actions further. She understood that military discipline required consequences for disobedience, even when the results were positive. But she also knew that she would make the same decision again if faced with similar circumstances. The official investigation into the mission took 3 weeks to complete. During this time, Maria continued her regular duties while waiting to learn whether she would face disciplinary action or court-martial proceedings. The uncertainty was difficult, but she tried to focus on her work and maintain her normal routine. When Colonel Mitchell finally called her into his office to discuss the investigation results, Maria was prepared for the worst. Instead, she found herself facing a decision that would define the rest of her military career. The Marine Corps was offering her the opportunity to join an elite special operations unit where her skills and decision-making abilities would be put to use in the most challenging missions the military had to offer. Staff Sergeant Santos, Colonel Mitchell said as he handed her a set of orders. Your actions during this mission demonstrated both exceptional marksmanship skills and the kind of independent thinking that we need in special operations. However, they also demonstrated a tendency toward insubordination that could be problematic in future situations. Maria read the orders and realized that she was being offered assignment to Marine Special Operations Command, one of the most prestigious and challenging positions available in the military. It was an opportunity that most Marines could only dream of, but it also meant accepting even greater risks and responsibilities. The choice is yours, Colonel Mitchell continued. You can accept this assignment and continue pushing yourself to the limits of what's possible, or you can remain in your current position where your actions will be more closely supervised. Maria didn't hesitate before giving her answer. The same instincts that had driven her to take the shot despite orders to withdraw now compelled her to accept the challenge of special operations work. She had proven to herself and others that she was capable of making difficult decisions under extreme pressure, and she wanted to continue testing those abilities in service to her country. 3 months later, she reported to her new unit and began the most challenging phase of her military career. The training was brutal and the missions were more dangerous than anything she had experienced before, but Maria thrived in the environment of constant challenge and high expectations. Years later, when people asked her about the shot that changed her life, Maria always emphasized that her decision had been about more than just eliminating an enemy target. It had been about proving to herself that she was willing to take responsibility for difficult decisions and accept the consequences of her actions, even when those decisions went against direct orders. The rifle she used that day was eventually retired and displayed in the Marine Corps Museum, along with a description of the mission and the shot that made it famous. But for Maria, the most important outcome of that day wasn't the recognition or the career opportunities that followed. It was the knowledge that when faced with the most difficult decision of her life, she had found the courage to do what she believed was right, regardless of the personal cost.